All righty, well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining today's panel. So we're covering a really important topic today, just around the talent crisis within midstream, how companies are attracting talent, training talent, retaining information, all very relevant things for companies today. So with me today, we have four excellent panelists. First off, we have Alan Hughes. Alan is the Director of Engineering at Magnolia River, and where he focuses on natural gas infrastructure. He has decades of experience in civil engineering and works with a large staff of engineers at various experience levels across the board, from new staff to experienced to somewhere in between. Next up, we have Cassandra Moody. She is the President and Principal Engineer of Time for Change LLC. She's a licensed professional mechanical engineer and recovering pipeline operator with over 15 years of experience with a large North American oil and gas midstream company. She started her company in 2019, and it's based in Houston, and it's helping pipeline operators to safeguard ROI as she defines it, and that's with a return on integrity. She believes in a practical integrity management system that is compliant and efficient. And Cassandra has a passion for the training and development of next generation engineers and women professionals through her internship program called Essential Skills for Success. Next up, we have Gary Hines. Gary is currently the VP of Operations for the Pipeline Research Council International, and he has vast hands-on pipeline engineering experience with Williams and Southern Star, and previously served as the VP of Learning and Professional Development at the Southern Gas Association. Last up, we have Luke Jane. Luke has a wide variety of experience in materials and corrosion engineering for large operators, along with years of consulting experience under his belt as well. And most recently, he started his own consulting firm called Golden Woods, and this is focused on cost-effective solutions for sustainable energy and civil infrastructure. So the agenda today is quite simple, actually. We want to discuss some of the main topics impacting the midstream industry around talent, acquisition, training, and that retaining of knowledge. So this is the important part, though. So on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a Q&A box for chat with the audience, and this is important because we're going to be talking about a lot of good topics, a lot of stuff probably on your mind as well in the audience. And the last portion of this session today is where you all get to ask questions and kind of pick the panelist brain on how they see things, maybe specifically at your company. So throughout the session today, if you do have a question or comment, feel free to put it in that chat box, and then at the end we will get to it where we can. So with that, let's dive on in to our first topic. So attracting new talent and kind of the potentially struggle there that many of you all at operators or service providers might have seen. It's really no secret that the number of petroleum engineering graduates is dropping, and maybe if not petroleum engineering, other types of engineering graduates in the oil and gas space. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that over the past decade alone, the number of petroleum engineering grads has dropped by 75%. So 75% less than there were 10 years ago going into the workforce. That potentially a huge problem, but starting there, what has, asking the panel, right, and Cassandra first, what has your experience been with the shrinking number of new graduates entering the energy industry, and how has that potentially impacted your operations and what you've seen?
Thanks, Nick. I've definitely seen a shift in the last decade or so in both the type of engineering majors that we're seeing and also the quantity of them as well. So I think in terms of just dealing with the problem of fewer candidates of a certain background, as employers, we've had to expand our perspective and open our minds to different engineering disciplines, maybe even disciplines outside of engineering to solve some problems. Because in the midstream industry, it's not just engineering. There's elements of process, communication, business, and optimization. So that's kind of been my experience, is just expanding beyond the traditional petroleum engineering graduate and seeking more so skill sets from candidates rather than particular elements on their resumes.
Alan, what about you?
Here at Magnolia River, we're a natural gas design firm, and most of our engineers that come in, we wish we had the opportunity for petroleum engineers, but they're civil and mechanicals. We have we're right here in North Alabama, and NASA is located here in Huntsville, so we have to be very competitive because you've got engineers going to NASA and also in the high tech that supports NASA in this area. So we do have mostly civils and mechanicals. I did do a little research, and I did notice that UAH, University of Alabama in Huntsville, has had a 14% decline just in mechanicals and civils in the last 3 years, which surprises me somewhat. I'm an Auburn grad, and I checked theirs for the past decade. Their civil and mechanical numbers has stayed fairly constant. So that is good news for us, since that's my pool I pull from. But it's again, we have to be very competitive because we are competing against NASA and that high tech industry.
Okay, Gary, what have you seen?
Yeah, Nick, thanks. And some of what Alan was just talking about, I was going to mention as well. I think the first thing to, some of this shift in the industry is certainly just a recognition of the drop in supply is just a transition to those actually picking up the technical trades has increased more than it has. So that's actually good news for our industry to an extent. But to the point that Alan was making, as much as there's been maybe some incremental shift in what I call the supply, I think the demand is higher. I think there's more competition for the engineers that traditionally that we've expected to come to our industry. And so I would actually put this as a bit more of a macro issue, not necessarily an industry-centric crisis. I think you got to factor in the macro perspectives. And the good news is, here's the best news, is that from a return on investment, engineering, I actually pulled a U.S. News and World U.S. News report that indicated that the return on investment, the top 5 positions are all engineers. So we've got that going in our favor, that there's still the supply that's being generated, but I think the demand has shifted, and so we're actually now competing with other organizations that we hadn't in the past, even so much on the technology front that engineers are going to that side just because of their ability to critically think and apply process, et cetera. So some of this is a bit, I think, of a macro shift, and it's not necessarily anything that we are or are not doing, but I know we'll probably get into this regarding things that we can intentionally do to make sure that we can attract that talent better in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Luke, what about you?
So, I mean, I can speak to kind of my personal experience. I haven't done a lot of broad research across the industry, but I was in a role where we hired probably about 15 people, most of them graduates from about 2018 to 23. So you figure 15 hires, you're probably talking around 60 interviews or so. So I kind of, got a fairly good, I guess, view on kind of what that landscape was. And this is kind of straddling the COVID era. So there was all that complexity. One thing that's kind of apparent is, well, let me back up. I think there's about 3 things that served us well to be successful in that sort of era in the context that we're talking about, with maybe less interest in engineering and maybe less in oil and gas specifically. The first, which we tackled head on, was to convey that the work is meaningful. The second is we were able to, and we made sure that we were clear that we were offering very competitive compensation compared to other industries. Manufacturing, even aerospace, was something we could do just based on the labor market and supply and demand for candidates. And then the third thing we did, which it's a bit controversial, but and there's nuances here, is we offered remote flexible work, which I think was important to younger people. So, to step through those briefly, the meaningful work being meaningful. So I think I had about 0 candidates show up to interview and say, I'm just pumped to work in the oil and gas industry, and I've been waiting my whole life for this, and this is what I want to do. In fact, probably 30% said, hey, I saw on your website you guys do renewables. I have nothing against renewables, great people, great work, but that's not what I was doing, right? And they're like, well, there are opportunities to progress into renewables. And, we tackled that head on because, frankly, I wanted to hire people that were going to take care of oil and gas pipelines for the next 5 to 40 years, right? You train them up, you want them to be engaged, and there's a great future there. So we would say, it's meaningful, and we'd step through just kind of the basic premise of what it does for everybody, that almost everyone fills up their car with gas. Nearly everyone heats their house with natural gas. It's how people stay warm. It's how people get to work. And, if you have your well off, you don't maybe care as much if the price of gas or heat goes up and down. But if you're living on the margins, if you're paycheck to paycheck, that makes a big difference. And what we strive to do is to keep that competitive and keep those prices down. And the second thing, being in corrosion and integrity, is we're obviously, concerned with pipeline safety. And there's millions of people that live near pipelines, and they don't even know it, and they don't need to know it, as long as we're doing our job and taking care of those pipelines. So, frankly, we're keeping people alive. We're supporting the way of life that we all take for granted, and we're keeping people safe. And there's huge amounts of satisfaction and meaning and purpose in that. And, I think we were successful in communicating that. And I think it could be a game changer with how people thought about working in our industry in a matter of minutes. Second thing, competitive pay. I mean, it's just a labor market thing. It's important work. There's not a lot of people attracted to it. It's not the flashiest thing. So the salaries are relatively high. I mean, we can offer 10, 20, 25% more compensation in some cases than competitive industries. And that, that means a lot when you're 25 and you're paying off, education debt and stuff like that. And then the third thing is remote flexible work environment. It is important. Companies are all over the place. It's a little bit of whipsaw, but we invested in and developed and implemented the structures we needed to support that, which are, largely around communication, incentives, and accountability. And we were able to offer that, and that was very attractive. So that's kind of how we tackled those challenges. And I'd say that, that worked for us very well in that context.
Absolutely. And Luke, you kind of hit on our second question already, which is great. And Gary, you kind of hit on this as well, right? Which is there's a lot of folks that still like engineering. And I remember even when I was in college, right? Like in high school, everyone wanted to do petroleum engineering because, like you said, it's the highest paying major, out of school in most cases. Then there's this big shift to software engineering, and everyone wanted to go work in Silicon Valley and get that stock. And then that kind of, I don't think that's dead by any means, but in that time, production increased, right? Domestically, internationally of gas. And so there's still this huge need for petroleum engineers, but, maybe the shine of just the money side, folks are much more interested in green engineering than they used to be. I think that's, a natural thing for entering, Gen Z and below, frankly, at this point. But what can be done? Like Luke brought up some key items of, kind of maybe potentially repositioning oil and gas as a career and where to go there. But do the rest of you kind of have any thoughts on, outside of just strictly compensation, which, is big and is, only going to grow, frankly, especially as demand rises and supply, continues to kind of flatline. But, what else can be done to kind of increase the number of grads, getting into this space?
I'll go ahead and jump in. I think it starts even before those recent grads are looking for jobs. As an integrity engineer, I'm always thinking about threats to integrity programs. So I kind of think about the knowledge threat, kind of like a damage prevention. You want to prevent damage. You don't want people hitting your pipelines with excavators or when they're installing a pool or what have you. Same thing with the knowledge. You don't want to not have that knowledge base to get from. So how can you proactively prevent against that threat? And again, I think it starts early. So starting even elementary school age, doing outreach activities to show, this is what engineers do. They don't just work on trains or in gas stations, which is what I thought of when I was a young professional before I even got into college. And so many of those college students select those majors well in advance when they're in their early stages of high school. So it's really at those stages when the young professionals are making decisions about their future careers and what they want to study. And they really have no idea what practically engineers do unless their parents are in the industry or there's some legacy oil and gas. And then twofold, having actual events like Gary, I'm sure you'll probably mention this when you answer, PRCI has an amazing facility here in Houston. So opening up opportunities like that to engage the public with things that industry professionals are doing to give those young students an idea of, oh, it could be fun to go to work. This is, a really big challenge. Getting them curious about what engineers do from an early age is a way that I think the industry can help increase those numbers and avoid that threat of not having the knowledge base.
I agree 100% with Cassandra, and I was fortunate enough to have a civil engineer dad, and he was in the municipality utility business. And so I understood that, but there's so many people that, especially like you said, middle school through high school even, they have no concept of what the engineer does. And I tell everybody the utility engineer is a wonderful spot to be, because every city needs a utility engineer. So you can work anywhere in the world. So it's something that we need to really encourage the younger people. And again, I appreciate her bringing that up, that many of the folks think we drive trains, but we do not. But one of the things I thought about was the green agenda that's been coming out of DC lately. Definitely has not put oil into the sexy energy class, and more of the engineers are being drawn over to the greener jobs. And I've actually had a little concern about this, and sometimes I see it advertised on TV, but I actually reached out to a past APGA, American Public Gas Association president, and said, our industry doesn't do a good job of promoting ourselves. I said, it's bad when I turn on the TV and the normal channel I'm watching, and I see our industry being bashed over and over and over. And he said, I really hadn't thought about it that much. I said, we've got to do a better job of getting out and promoting that we are an abundant domestic energy source that we all use, we all consume, have for hundreds of years, and we need to keep this trend going. So I think that'll help maybe push that we are a good energy source. And then obviously, I think somebody mentioned that we definitely got to be paying for the worth of the engineer. So maybe we need to get starting salaries back up a little higher.
Alan, some things you said there, and actually the entire panel has mentioned this. I went out and pulled some information, actually found a fastcompany.com article. Generation Alpha is coming, and I was a bit glad I was sitting down, by the way, but I was a bit taken back because I'm Gen Xer. I'm still trying to figure out Gen Z from the perspective of what are their needs, what are their wants, what drives them. And along comes Generation Alpha. And just a quick overview of what that article talked about. Now, keep in mind, these are individuals born after 2010. So these are not what I would consider strong consumers in the retail world yet, but they're not far from that. But some things that I guess resonated with me. They have an interest in what they called healing careers. In other words, making things better for people. And that resonated with me with our industry, because that's what we do. I was going to say downfall, the pullback on that for our industry is our good day is whenever people don't hear necessarily anything about what we do, right? We don't want incidents whenever we've got low frequency, but whenever something does happen, it's typically of high consequence. We want that to be at zero. We don't want that to happen. But unfortunately for our industry, it's what I call the hidden highway. Most of what we do is underground and silent and hidden, and people don't hear about. That's the good news. But whenever it comes to seeing a robot or seeing an airplane fly, or we talked about trains, there's physical things that you can imagine that you partake in. It's harder to do in our industry. So I think we've got a handicap associated with that. But again, with the Generation Alpha wanting healing careers to give back to the industry. I thought about this next one quite a bit regarding social media has a huge impact. Should not be any surprise with that. A considerable number want to be an influencer or a professional gamer. So scratch the professional gamer. On the influencer side, who's the influencer in our industry? I don't think that exists. Now, maybe that's a challenge for one of us on the panel or one of the attendees today to go start their own channel and be an influencer for the industry. We're all smiling about that, but I think that there's something to be said about that, for having a strong advocate that is an influencer for those, as the entire panel has talked about, is even before they get to making a decision in college that I want to be an engineer and change the world in the space of the energy industry. So I think that's something to be said. And Luke really highlighted this last one that I just want to point out, and that is certainly the pay, but also there's more to it than that with that work-life balance and trying to find other things that they're interested in. Certainly the value of the work, I think, goes a long way. But you know, the days of the baby boomers where somebody stayed in a work environment for 30 years is gone. That doesn't exist anymore. And certainly I've had 4 different organizations, and I never expected to have more than one. So Nick, some of this context, I think you've got this in later information, but you got to start systematizing your knowledge to where no matter who comes in, they can actually use that, because that long institutional knowledge of an employee, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but I think it's gone. So I think it's going to require more of, instead of relying on the individual, that anywhere that you can systematically ingrain that knowledge in something that people can incrementally pick up and do, and not say you got to go watch 6 hours of videos to understand this. You got to find a way to incrementally do it, because again, Generation Alpha and the generations to come are so used to incremental bite-sized chunks and swiping every 3 seconds. So I think we've got some things that are inherently against us, but we got to keep an eye on Generation Alpha as well whenever we talk about what does it take to be able to make sure that we can get the new graduates and the new workforce into the workplace.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I would just add, I think the positioning of the industry with these folks is it's suffering a bit, and it needs to change, right? Because I would say one of the most environmentally friendly careers you could do is come in and make oil and gas safer, make it better for the environment, you know, make some breakthroughs to lower emissions. I mean, there is nothing you could do better today, because a lot of these folks don't realize you can't just unplug oil and gas and plug in solar one day and life's just going to go on. And I think there's kind of this mindset when folks choose a major, and that's not the case. And I think, you know, Gary, I remember at your, you know, the PRCI conference last year, your keynote speaker was just so focused on, you know, no one really like loves the emissions that go into the air. Like, no one likes this, but the downside is people don't have heat, people can't go anywhere, and that's not okay either. And so you have to choose what to do there. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, maybe we need to get the TikTok channel. I see Cassandra brought up there is a Pipeline Things podcast. Maybe those are the next influencers that we need to push out there for the new generation. But yeah, you know, the positioning has to change at some level. Okay, well, we will move on from kind of the talent attraction side of things. So we're getting new folks in at some point or another. But as I think you would probably all agree, even if folks are going straight into oil and gas in a different, you know, in some flavor, there are definitely gaps between what they learn in the classroom and what they are actually doing on the day-to-day. So I wanted to kind of touch on, you know, with these new grads, what have you seen in the gaps between that instruction and, you know, really the on-the-job training with the engineers that might be 22, 23 years old when they're coming into the workforce?
So I have seen, working with young professionals throughout my career and with my intern program, probably the #1 thing with these new engineers, they're very strong technical. They have gone through their classes. A lot of them, especially with the modeling and 3D software that's far advanced since I went into school, they blow me out of the water with their capabilities. So it's not the technical side, it's the soft skills side that I've seen the biggest gaps. And I kind of bucket them in 3 areas. The first of which is not knowing how to have an effective mentor-mentee relationship, in terms of knowing what that relationship is, what the roles are of both parties, and how to facilitate questions and check-ins and ensure that expectations are met on both sides. So whether it's with the new engineer's boss, or if it is a formalized mentorship program, there have been huge strides for both sides, frustration, where there's just not a lot of that development coming out from education. And then secondly, their confidence. So as I mentioned with specifically the 3D modeling that I've experienced with some of my interns and young engineers, they're fantastic with modeling, and they tend to downplay their ability to bring their skill set into industry thinking, oh, you know, all these engineers have been engineering for all these years, so they have to be much better than me. And I challenge them, say, no, you have come from an education background with the most recent technology that wasn't even available when I was in school. So use that. You have, you know, done this capstone project. You've talked about this in your internship. Bring that confidence into your first project at work or your internship project or whatever it may be. So confidence, I think, is another thing. And then thirdly, the ability to be curious. I feel like a lot of the curious problem solving elements that I thought were core when I was going through engineering school seems to be lacking in the next generation. They will, you know, spit something into a software program, take out the number and go do something without really thinking, and does this make sense? Is this the right thing to do? Is, you know, what's going on here? So getting engineers to be curious engineers again is probably the third area that I'm noticing some gaps. And that's where on-the-job training for sure can help.
Yeah, and I've mentioned we do civil and mechanicals primarily. So college teach the basics for those concepts coming straight out of school. And then we try to focus on the natural gas design side of it. And we'll take an engineer, and even after 2 years of on-the-job training, mentoring here with our other engineers, they've probably only experienced 60% of what we totally design at Magnolia River. So it's back to that mentoring that Cassandra said. They've got to know how to do that. You can probably tell by the color of my hair, I'm a little old school. I like to have face-to-face. I definitely, COVID changed the world and maybe become a little more tech savvy. And we're doing remote training today. And I like to have that face-to-face training. And really for the first 2 years, we highly encourage that here. And I know that's not what the younger engineers like to hear, but I think you gain so much more having that mentor sitting, you know, within a voice shout away to give you hands-on training. And again, it takes 2 years to only see 60% of what we've designed. It really takes about a good 3 years for that engineer, new hire, to experience pretty much about 95% of everything we've done on site.
Oh, okay.
Just real quick on just a couple of points there is echo what was said regarding that mentorship. I think that's really important. Specifically, got to be intentional about it. Got to be intentional about giving back to them for that practical application of the theoretical understanding that they have. Not going to get that holistically in a university setting. Universities are not designed for that. They're not professional, you know, corporations that have a deadline for delivery of a project. It's an academic environment, so they're not going to get that. But I do think that the engineers are better what I call street cred worthy than what I probably was. But that's because they're doing, as Cassandra mentioned, the capstones. They're doing more of the design teams and getting engaged and figuring out how to work with people on a challenger project. But the other thing that I would add on that mentoring, I do think that's really important. The other thing that I would say is after about a period of 5 years, and this is because I didn't do this, I didn't apply myself to do this until later in my career, and I feel like I missed about a 10-year window, is got to get engaged with a trade association or a member organization somewhere, somehow. And there's a saying out there that, well, what if I train somebody and they leave? Well, the opposite is, what if I don't and they stay? So you got to invest in the people beyond just the practical application and certainly the standards and the process by which we use for high integrity of what the output of the product is. But got to give them the opportunity to learn from certainly a mentor within the organization to kind of shadow and lead and direct their work. But about 5 years in, I would challenge organizations and groups to look for opportunities to engage them within professional organizations, whether that be the American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, for civil engineers, ASME. There's plenty of what I would call industry-focused trade associations. We are one. This is not about a plug. It's about the development of the individual. After about 5 years, you got to find a way to broaden their horizon with finding others and network that they can build to strengthen them. And I think that encourages them to stay because you're investing them in for what they do. There's a risk there that they leave because now their network is more broad, but at some point, fairly soon in their career, you got to get them engaged with other industry professionals.
So I'd say I've noticed two principal areas. The first is what I'd call or describe as sort of a practical understanding of engineered systems. So what by engineered systems, I mean like a plumbing system or an electrical system. So we're talking about pipelines, right? Well, what are pipelines? Well, you got the piping, you got the valves, you got some relief systems, you got some pressure sources, pumps, compressors, and that's a lot of what you're dealing with. You have a lot of those things in your house or your car as well, right? So there was a big divide, and something that we looked for when we interviewed graduates is if they had practical experience dealing with engineered systems, either from their home life, maybe in agricultural context, maybe they had been in trade school, maybe they had a previous job working in a machine shop or welding, maybe they had a hobby where they rebuilt their car. Those individuals would come with they had their head around engineered systems. So if you give them a P&ID and they can get past the symbology, and they're like, okay, yeah, these are pumps, and we got valves, and and these are isolation points, and this is a relief system. They get it pretty quickly. Whereas if you don't have that background, you're talking, you need to really be in the field for a while to be able to conceptualize what you're dealing with. So we always look for individuals, if you had rebuilt your car and got through engineering school, you're way ahead of the crowd because you have the combination of the education and the practical hands-on conception of what these systems were. The second thing was, it was almost like it's I would call it basic principles, basic engineering principles, so like mechanics, chemistry, maybe geology if we're talking about petroleum. It's like the stuff they learned in their first 2 years is actually the most valuable in your bachelor's degree, and the stuff you learn the second couple of years at the crapshoot if you'll ever use it. So we were looking also for people who could think through and problem solve using their basic chemistry and mechanics and things like that. So I would, a typical interview question, and maybe it was mean or hard or whatever, but I'm like, well, you're interviewing for a pipeline engineering firm. It's an integrity and corrosion department. So I'd ask two questions commonly. One, what are the attributes of a pipe that would determine how much pressure it could contain? And, I'm not looking for a full equation, but I'm looking for like this strength of the material, the wall thickness. I'd probably less than half, 50% could get that. And, it was rare, OD if that came out too, but that was the sort of thing I was looking for. Can you apply your basic principles to think through things that are important? Or because it's corrosion, I'd be like, can you describe in general terms a oxidation reduction reaction, what's generally happening there? Now, again, they'd have to think back to Chem 1 or Chem 2, and it'd been a couple of years. But that's the sort of stuff that we really need applied in the day-to-day technical problem solving, is not necessarily, say you're doing some basic fitness for service calcs for like metal loss, your equations aren't that hard, but, if you kind of understand how hoop stress works and you've got a piece of your pipe wall missing, you're basically trying to figure out what that means. That's the sort of thought process you need to have. So I'd say the two things that we were really looking for that were a little bit scarce was the practical hands-on. Do you have your head around what a plumbing system is which pipelines are? And two, are you in the weeds in your 400 level classes, or did you remember your basic mechanics and chemistry? Because that's the knowledge you're going to need to bring to bear to kind of problem solve effectively day to day. So those are the two areas I think personally I witnessed.
Absolutely. I think always a gap between theory and application, right? So, and then real quick, Cassandra, I know in your life today, you're kind of also like an expert witness, right? Sometimes for some of these cases where maybe there is an issue. Has training ever been like brought up as one of the reasons? Like, has that been like kind of the rationale for maybe why an issue occurred in any of these cases? Can you even say, or?
I can neither confirm nor deny that 100% of my cases involve training or qualification. No, in all seriousness, you're dealing with people who are making decisions
Yep.
that have safety consequences. So what those people are doing, how they're thinking, what they remember from freshman chemistry, what industry organizations they're in, what 2-year training program they've had, how consistent their company is on what they have written in their procedures versus what actually happens in practice on a day-to-day basis. All of those factors come into play. And it might be a little bit more expensive to have a robust program and do thorough training, but at the end of the day, if you have an incident, and sometimes it's not even if, it's when you have an incident, the cost consequences of those beyond just, safety considerations and God forbid loss of life, but financial consequences, lost revenue, lost products, repair costs, litigation costs, it's very, very expensive. And spending a little bit of time being proactive, training and ensuring the qualification of people will definitely have a favorable ROI for sure when considering the expert litigation work that I do.
If I could jump in real quick there, and that I think this becomes the hard part, Nick, is whenever you're talking about investment in training, where's the ROI associated with that? Because it typically is not seen immediately, other than maybe some efficiency gained of, I now can perform this task at a better pace. But to Cassandra's point, I was involved with a litigation case for an explosion of a power plant that we delivered natural gas to, and I'll never forget the attorney that was lead for us. He'd made the comment, he said, having adequate training and processes doesn't eliminate any liability, but it certainly has a big impact on reducing and impacting the liability outcome that you have. And just a hot off the press item I read in the Wall Street Journal this morning regarding the BP plant, I think it's Ohio or Indiana. The Chemical Safety Board issued their final report, and it is chock full of essentially references to lack of training. So I think it's clearly evident that it has an impact. It's just a matter of how do you measure the return on the investment of that.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good segue into kind of our other question in this segment, and it's exactly what you all have kind of said. Like, how should the internal and external industry learning program support newer transitioning engineers, right? And they might vary depending on the size of the company, and as Gary said, kind of the appetite and the budget of how much do we invest on the front end versus try and take accept that liability on the back end, right? Heaven forbid if something does happen. But do you have any kind of recommendations for how these programs should be set up, and should folks really focus on an internal program only? Should they look externally for support from the industry? What are your thoughts there?
I'll go ahead and start. There's definitely a place for internal and external programs to help new transitioning and even seasoned engineers, because seasoned engineers need training too to stay up with recent technologies and changes in regulations, which are happening all the time. So I think there's definitely a place for both. On the internal side, most of the engineers are engineers, and engineers sometimes aren't the strongest when it comes to human factors. Definitely process side, engineers are usually really good about that. But some of the communication issues, change management, some of those soft skills, engineers really aren't so strong at that. And I've seen a lot of benefit come when other people with different backgrounds from engineering are brought in to help facilitate those training programs. So if your company is large enough to where you have those resources available to help develop those training programs, that's great. But if not, there are some other external, whether that's a training company like Technical Toolboxes or an industry organization. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to kind of work together. And one of the sayings that I always use is a rising tide raises all of the boats. So as an industry as a whole, the better that we collectively get with training and development, both internal and external, the better it's going to be. Because as I think it was Gary earlier said, no news is good news. Like, you don't want to hear about pipelines. Like, that's not good for the industry. And training is a huge piece of that. So one of the specific programs that I'm involved with is the Young Pipeline Professionals. They have a mentorship program. I think that's a great opportunity to draw from a bunch of different pipeline operators, service providers, consulting companies, to really work with those young professionals, whether they're recent grads or early career professionals. So plug for them. And then also other industry organizations, like we've mentioned with the PRCI, API, AGA. I think that a lot of the, especially the organizations that put out standards like API and 1160 with the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle that they use as a basis for the integrity regulations, that gives them a good platform to speak uniformly to the industry about improvements, lessons learned, things like that. And also the regulatory agencies like PHMSA and some of the state agencies could be involved in that solution as well.
With every new engineer that we bring on at Magnolia River, they're immediately assigned to a professional engineer. And in the consulting business, which we're in, you've got to be a professional engineer to do any of the design work. So that allows them to have that personal mentor for the next couple of years, and we highly encourage them to go and pursue their PE in this time frame. We also have an internal QA/QC process, and we've got drafters and engineers here, but we pair up that younger engineer with another younger engineer, and they're actually reviewing each other on every project. And they may be the reviewer for a project, or they may be the designer with someone else being a reviewer. So they get to learn from each other in the same age, as well as in the same QA/QC process. That professional engineer is the top reviewer that before he puts his stamp on it. So it's back to that mentoring with your PE. It allows them to learn the different type of design work we do, and get to, as I call them, they may be the blind eye reviewer. And we look for that for somebody that you dig too long into a project, you just miss the obvious, but you get that young engineer that may have been here 1 year, but they're the blind eye reviewer, and they go, hey, why is this in Alabama and you mentioned Florida on the cover sheet? I mean, it's just things that they obviously can see because they're not as deep into it. Because time is so valuable in training and in the design side, obviously we use technical toolboxes for all of our engineers have access to it. And then just recently we went with the training hub, and each engineer is required to do at least 40 hours of training on an annual basis as part of their progression to the next level in engineering.
I don't know that I would add a lot to that from the practical application, because Alan, you just hit on the practical piece of something I was going to mention. Is anywhere you can systematize that and capture that and not have it sitting in somebody's brain. If nothing wrong with having the mentors, right, for somebody that can help them and explain, but from a business continuity perspective, they can win the lottery the next day. They can decide that they want to retire the next day. There's risk associated with that. That said, you can't put everything in a system and rely on a system. You still need the people. So I think there's a healthy balance with that. The last comment I would make here on the internal and external is how do you leverage artificial intelligence with some of this? And not that that has to provide an answer, but I'll give you a perfect example of how we're doing that. We have at PRCI, we have over 2,000 research reports in 72 years. To send somebody quote to a file library room and say, have fun, have at it, is a little bit daunting. So if we can help phrase things together based on what their request is, instead of a simple what I call an internet search, then at least it guides them in a direction to say, well, based on what you're asking, here's 3 reports that you really need to focus on. So instead of focusing on 2,000, now they're down to 3. So I do think there's some leverage of artificial intelligence. It is not the answer, but it is certainly something to help us be able to muddle through to some extent the amount of content and information that is out there. So that's the other ad that I would put into this part of the conversation.
I think from my perspective, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is, I think everyone said it so far, is pairing junior staff with experienced staff, and not just for a day or a whatever, help you get through HR hurdles, but actually work day in and day out, like technical direction, okay, produce this deliverable, and then they redline the heck out of it and tell you all the things you need to redo, and then you redo it and you rewrite the report 4 times, and you redo the BOM 4 times, and through that process, that grind, after several years, you're now absorbing their knowledge and experience as much as you can, and that's that's kind of how the engineering profession keeps on going. The whole idea of having PEs, and it's a trade in addition to, you don't just learn it, you work, and it passes down generation to generation, which is really hard right now because of the big gap. But there's no, I guess, which kind of gets us to another thing that came up, which is leveraging literature and technical reports. So I worked for a company and they had a lot of infrastructure, but in history, when I first started, it was one of the majors, and they had literally thousands of technical reports. I mean, it was like every project we wrote a technical report, and that had been going on for decades. And it was a huge company, and they had they had librarians and stuff. And I mean, I learned so much from those things. Reading, people had retired out of the companies 5 to 10 years ago, and I had one project which, Gary, kind of to your point, they said, it was a good new, you're the new guy, right? And they're like, okay, find all the well integrity and corrosion reports that we've ever written, and pull out metadata so that they're searchable, and we can set them up in a database. And man, I had to look through like 300 well integrity reports written over the last 30 years, or 500 or something. I could not know anything about well integrity after that. I mean, it's just, there's so much information there, and they're high quality reports, and they're written by, experts and experienced people, and that knowledge transferred. It just could not. So those two things, I think, go together. I think the remote learning is a big piece. That's why I'm engaged with Technical Toolbox, producing the remote learning recorded sessions, because I think it's, from a value proposition, it's huge. I mean, if people, I've done training on and off for several years, and if companies want to know how much is this going to cost, well, it's going to be different if I'm flying somewhere and we're doing it in person. It's a one-off, and it's not recorded, and then it's done. And then likewise, if being a manager, and it's like, you look at your training budget and you're like, how many people can I send to a $2,000 class for a week, and then all their time and travel. So there's so much knowledge that can be generated by experienced people in the industry, including semi-retired people. They can put together a half hour, a 1 hour training recording, with Technical Toolbox, and that's available, and people can turn on their computer and watch it, and it keeps the costs way down. So I think that's huge. But another thing I think is really important is field experience. So I think if you're going to be very good in your field, probably in that 2 to 10 year range, you probably want to spend the equivalent of a couple full years of daily field experience. Again, just to soak in that. You're just going to miss things if you're not doing that, I think. Not to say that everyone, there's a lot of career paths, but I think that's hugely important. And then the last thing I want to touch on is self-education. So I've always kind of seen myself and the people that have mentored me kind of more as guides. Like, we're not going to tell you everything, but here's the standards you need to be reading. Here's the technical reports that are really important. Here's the papers that went behind why the standards changed over the years the way that they did. You can't just, I read my company procedure and it told me what to do, so I'm going to comply with that and I'll probably be fine. It's like, no, you need to know the code. You need to know why the code developed. You need to, there's stems of literature, there's so much, and it takes years, but you have to be, if you want to be really good in your field, you have to be continually immersing yourself in that sort of stuff. So it takes a bit of self-motivation, but I think as an educator, a lot of our job is to point them in the right direction and show them, how they can, keep on moving themselves forward.
Absolutely. Okay. I think we'll move on to our last section here. So we've kind of already touched on bits and pieces of this, and we have about 10 minutes, so I'll actually kind of combine the questions. But retaining knowledge, right? There was an article not too long ago from the New York Times that said 700,000 folks had left oil and gas from 2016 to 2022. Many of those are retirements, some maybe changed industries, that sort of thing. But without a doubt, there's a brain drain going on in the industry right now, right? And a lot of that kind of institutional knowledge that maybe is in one person's brain is not getting out in time before they leave, right? So kind of what are your all's thoughts on, some effective strategies for knowledge transfer from retiring or, employees moving on? And then I'll kind of combine this with our other question, and which is what role does technology play in the process of that knowledge retention process?
I want to reiterate what Luke mentioned as part of his last spiel about the well logs that you looked at. That's exactly why the new regulations from PHMSA on the gas side released some rules around data integration and gathering and some additional resources. It's not just to be burdensome on operators, but it's so that they'll experience exactly what Luke mentioned about going through those logs and really learning about the assets. And that brings the technology in. When you're going through and analyzing these vast data sets for pipeline integrity and facilities that are gathering new data points every single day, as well as all of the longevity of existing anomalies that have corrosion growth rates and crack fatigue and all of these data considerations, there's definitely an opportunity to leverage technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, but you also have to be careful to balance the SME knowledge. So I think this question here that we're talking about is really a broader discussion that's not just technology, it's not just knowledge retention, it's not just brain drain, it's really holistically as an industry, how are we managing the data, the information, the knowledge, and the processing. And one of the most practical ways that I've seen as an operator is we would have, we called them comprehensive risk assessments, and we would do them on a system every 5 years in our case. And in that meeting, it wasn't just the engineer at their desk, me with myself and my well logs, to bring in Luke's example, just analyzing and making thoughts and things like that. But it was a broader, outside of all of the company silos that we had. It brought in the field personnel, the engineers, the control room operators, the corrosion team, the personnel training that was managed under HR. It brought in accounting to be sure that the measurement was working. So all of the company groups were brought in, and in that meeting, we all looked at the initial data sets. We were curious and wondering, is this right? Is this, does this make sense? What's going on? And in that, we had the seasoned professionals sharing their knowledge, things that weren't captured on paper and on systems. And we thought about how to capture that, how to leverage technology. So really, I think breaking down company silos, looking at information, sharing information, and discussing and leveraging technology where it makes sense really addresses kind of all the questions that we're talking about here.
Succession planning is something that we always need to be focusing on as some of us approach the retiring age, as well as you've got engineers that are constantly, I told you we're in the NASA high-tech area of North Alabama, so we've got engineers coming and going, but having that mentorship with that senior engineer, PE, hopefully, and a younger, we're getting cross-training well enough that we can have some succession in case we do lose a younger engineer, but we definitely need to get away from that 2-week notice and then I'm out of here mentality. And we've got some recent retires coming up pretty soon, and we're trying to get folks with them for months in advance so that they can be mentored by that person and sort of that person stay on board, maybe drift back to being more of a PE and still be around. And I've always been a promoter of hiring retiree PEs that are in our industry, and today I've got 2 PEs that I have known for 35 years, so they've got 70 years experience between the 2 of them, and they're on my staff as part-time. They say I don't have to work, but I like doing a little work to keep their mind sharp. And also, the more info they share with my younger staff, the greater we are as a company. And then Technical Toolbox is obviously a place to have subject matter experts. And not only do these subject matter experts write the software that we use day in, day out, they're also there to help you focus on any specific concerns with a specific project. And that has really been a benefit for us here at Magnolia River, having that other set of subject matter experts out there that day in, day out, they do HDDs, and we don't do them every day, but we do them quite often. But we've got that extra person there to reach out to just give us yep, that's exactly what we were thinking. You're doing it the way we were. So glad to have Technical Toolbox as a partner.
Yeah, real quick on this one, Nick, because I think the comments have been shared that I want to point out. So I'm just going to highlight some things that have been talked about already, and that is one, just recognition. You're not going to be able to completely absorb out of somebody retiring that has 20 years, 30 years. It's first of all, it's recognition. It's not going to happen. But the second part of that, if you don't do anything intentional about it, you get nothing. So at least do something intentional to get something. And there's a couple of ways to do that, as Alan was talking about. Again, more systematic. Put things in place that no matter if person's sitting in Alabama or they're sitting in Minnesota or they're sitting in Salt Lake City, doesn't matter, they go to get it and they can use it. The third point I would make is a bit of I'll make this quick on an actual how I was what I would call trained, and it was how I was taught to fish instead of giving me a fish. I had a vice president whenever I worked on the pipeline operator side, whenever I entered the commercial services arena, and he would, I call it often because it was a bit frustrating. He would ask me questions, and my first response in my head was, how does he not know this? And it took me a couple of months, I was pretty dense, to realize it wasn't about him knowing, it was about him teaching me and giving me a practical example to go through and actually experience and find the data and review our tariff. So he was teaching me to fish. So Alan, I love what you said regarding, somebody knows they're coming up on that term, even if it's 3 years. Again, back to this mentoring perspective, Jim mentored me more than I recognized at the time. I just saw it as a frustrating task, but he mentored me and taught me to fish. And I'm forever grateful of him investing in me in doing that. And again, intentionally doing something instead of just waiting for that day to come that he was going to retire.
Yeah, I think a lot. I don't have much new to add to this particular question. I mean, I think that leveraging technology to better manage electronic records, I know that's a difficulty at all operators, all companies, even big consulting firms. But I mean, there's just a wealth of knowledge there in closed out projects and in technical reports that if it can be organized, if it's searchable, people can find what they're looking for. It's hugely valuable. And then I have also, a lot of the people that mentored me when I first entered the workforce, they've retired, and I've reached out to them over the years and brought them on as either contractors or part-time employees. And, I tell them, hey, just do work whatever you want, turn down whatever you want, but, we can't, no one has your knowledge. And, usually those people love to be able to have the opportunity to periodically come back and teach people and add value to projects. And sometimes I think it's really underappreciated at companies. I picked up one guy through a network. He had like 40 years experience with a utility operator. He was a corrosion expert. He retired on a Friday. I don't think there was any discussion of keeping him around, and they didn't even backfill his position. They just lost their SME of 40 years for this company. I hired him on Monday, and he was in the office at 7 a.m. just rearing to go and just pumped. And and I don't think anyone reached out to him. And of course, he was a huge asset to the team, and he's still a huge asset to me. And we talk as needed and work together as needed. And I mean, it seems like there could be a pathway, a natural pathway, to say, okay, this person is retiring. They have a lot of history and knowledge. It's not just exit path. It's, well, you're going to exit full time, but obviously we'd love to keep you around on your own terms to add whatever value and insight you can. And as far as I don't do that, I'm happy to be the one to step in and work with those guys, because it's just great. So I think that's probably underappreciated at a lot of companies. They don't realize what they're losing, because those people are just, in addition to consuming all the literature you can, you just can't replace their experience. It's not written down anywhere. So.
Absolutely, and there is something to be said for that semi-retirement of folks where they get to pick and choose their projects, but still go to the beach often. I think that's a great happy medium for everybody, and we have a lot of that at Technical Toolboxes too with some of our subject matter experts. So totally understand. Okay, I know we're about at time. We do have a few audience questions that I think we'll probably hit offline. I did want to briefly just touch on. This is the only shameless plug note from our sponsors. So as Luke and and Alan alluded to, one of the things Technical Toolboxes does is our training program. We're primarily known for our software, but training has and always will be core to what we do here as well. And as Alan said, the training and the software and the calcs, they all kind of play off of each other in a lot of ways. And that's how you really get the right decisions with the right software, right? So we do have a fairly new offering we just wanted to highlight, which is our, we call it the Training Hub Premium Pass. This is like an annual, all-in-one subscription pass. It offers live training, it offers on-demand training. We have customized pathways for, where anyone's at in their career, whether you are just starting out. We have kind of the plan there. If you are looking, mid-level, want to kind of move up to that senior expert level role, we have pathways there too. And it is all remote. It is all virtual. You don't have that long layover. You don't have those long days and high expenses at conferences. So we did want to just kind of highlight a poll. If we have a 1-week trial on this, if you all would like to kind of see what's inside, you'll actually see some of the faces on this call as trainers there. Feel free to just hit yes here, and we'll get you set up on a trial. There's no obligation there. And if you don't, all good, we'll leave you alone. We'll just shoot you a white paper that we put together, kind of covering a lot of the challenges that we've hit here today. But wanted to thank you all for listening. It was a good group on. We hope you learned, a bit about what we're trying to do with these challenges and how we see them across the industry. So we'll leave that poll open, but otherwise, we wish you all have a great day and stay cool out there. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.